Serious, has anyone who lived through a disaster where large numbers of people were killed or injured? How did you survive? My mother is a survivor of the Cambodian genocide. According to her, their family had to leave into the jungle, single file so that they didn't step on landmines, or rather minimize the risk. Everything they did was in that line, where they had to constantly worry about guerrilla fighters and animals. A lot of people died along the way, and my grandfather ended up taking care of a lot of the kids who lost their family along the way. Once they reached Vietnam, they were greeted by American soldiers who told them it wasn't safe there, and made them turn back. The second time they tried, they were greeted by the Red Cross who were evacuating people into America. My grandfather took one of the buses and told the rest of my family to do the same. In the meantime, they waited in the relief camp. Unfortunately, by the time the rest of my family was able to get on the buses, the US decided they had enough refugees, and the buses stopped coming. My family stayed in Vietnam for 2 years. My mom said she begged for food, as the older members were too proud. In America, my grandfather started a business, and once he had enough money, he bought plane tickets so that our family could reunite. The children that my grandfather saved went their own way after that, but we still keep in contact. Recently we took a trip to Australia, and the man, who has a family now, thanked my grandfather profusely for saving his life. On a summer evening in 2012 I survived the Aurora Theatre shooting. Part of my survival was pure luck that he didn't look down the row where I was huddled with my friends, either on his way in or out. It's changed my life, made me more aware that things can change in an instant on a whim, but permanently. I had never had something scar me so deeply. Still not over it, not sure I ever will be. Not exactly too many dead, but kind of a big number considering the place we were at. In 2007 while in the Solomon Islands I went through an earthquake that had a magnitude of 8.1 on a nearby island and had aftershocks up to a magnitude of 6.1. Surprisingly, despite spending most of my life in an area prone to these things, this was the first one I had experienced in my freaking life. I nearly shat myself when the earth started shaking. I was in a hut with some of my friends having some tea and biscuits, and then everything just started shaking. I remember it clearly at the time because I had diarrhea at the time, but I just had to hold it in. On top of that, I was away from home because I forgot now, but I was visiting a neighboring island called Simbo. So as soon as I felt the earthquake, I was simply like, frick that. I'm going into the mountains to avoid a freaking tsunami. It was a massive trek, and trust me, I did not stop to have a break, but I did it for the sake of my life. When you're in danger, the adrenaline is insane. I've been told ever since I was young that if the earth moves, you run up to the mountains. Some people decided to stay in their houses near the seashore because they thought that everything would be fine. But seriously, nothing is ever fine in these moments. Most of us got up there, but those who stayed behind got severely injured or killed. Complete villages were destroyed that were on the side of the sea. The thing is, people always forget what happens. Sure, with technology improving we can be warned before it happens, but your whole house being destroyed is still not worth it for a nice view. Heaps of houses were destroyed and God, it was awful. The cleanup is the worst part though. The moral of this story is whenever the earth moves, you freaking run up that mountain. I lived through a Category 4 hurricane. The eye passed over my house, which was pretty cool. We have buried power lines all the way to my house. A strategically important building is nearby, so we didn't lose power at all. Near the height of the storm we are watching CNN and realize that they were just down the street. My brother and I walked past their camera with surfboards under our arms as if we were going into the 40 feet surf. Not the smartest thing I've ever done. I remember seeing that on TV. My dad and I were cracking up. Not my story, but this happened to a friend of mine. On the day of the 7/7 attacks in London, he had an argument with his girlfriend over something trivial and consequently missed his train. He got a tube later than he normally would, and therefore he was on the tube behind the one that exploded outside of Russell Square. As the underground and the cars filled with dust and smoke, people naturally started panicking, and he told me he just wanted to get out and see the sun again. They were eventually let out and he walked about in a complete daze as it became clear there were other bombs that had gone off. He eventually wandered towards Tavistock as he heard another explosion and rounded the corner to see a double-decker bus with the top blown off. He said he honestly thought that the entire city was under attack and that this was just the opening salvo. He ran until he came to an HMV record store in the UK and hid in their basement level the entire day, paying staff to go out and get him food. The staff let him use their phone to call his family girlfriend, but he only left when the very nice staff were closing for the day. He laughs it off, but in retrospect it was just sheer fluke. He now has 2 daughters and is planning on marrying the GF, as I suppose she did save his life through nagging. I was in the 1999 Ismet earthquake in Turkey. I awoke in the middle of the night. My mom rushed into the bedroom me and my brothers were sleeping in and took us out of the apartment. Some buildings were damaged in our street, but it wasn't terrible. 2 of my cousins died when their house collapsed on them. I never met the older one, but younger one I still think about from time to time. I remember her smile and the way she would twirl with her dress. We were 9 years old. That's just sad, man. May your cousins rest in peace. Not sure if this counts. I was supposed to be at the midnight showing of Dark Knight Rises in Aurora. A group of friends went for our friend's birthday. I decided to go to the bar instead. Woke up to a slew of texts and a friend that had been killed there. Yeah, that definitely counts. I lived through the big Japan earthquake tsunami a few years ago. I was in the mountains, so that tsunamis weren't a threat and the earthquake didn't do much damage in my area. Stuff got thrown around in my apartment and there were cracks on the walls. The worst part in terms of affecting my daily life was the radiation scare. It rained shortly afterwards and I remember having to dig up the soil around my office with my other co-workers to remove the contaminated dirt. It's scary times. My sister went to one of the schools around Ground Zero on 9/11. She just heard chaos outside and somehow managed to get to safety with hordes of other people. We couldn't get through to her phone that day because all the lines were tied up. Hours later, she calls us asking us for a ride home. We were pretty damn relieved. When we asked her how she got to Queens, she told us herself and thousands of other people walked from downtown and crossed the bridge on foot. That's several hours of walking during a tragedy, all while knowing nothing. This story pales in comparison to other survivor stories from 9/11 though. On the 16th of April, 2007, during my freshman year of college at Virginia Tech, one of, if not the, I don't really want to look this up anymore, worst school shootings in history occurred. I was in McBride, a math building right next to Norris Hall. I could jump to the Norris Hall doors from McBride. I still had no idea what was happening when my class ended around 10 AM. Yet our teacher told us to just go back to our dorms and not go anywhere because a shooting happened earlier in the day on campus at West AJ, one of the residence halls. On our way out of the class, we were met by a cop with an M4, or a shotgun, yelling at us to stay inside and not come out. The sheer terror in his eyes still haunts me. For the next 6 hours, I watched as students jumped from windows and were hauled out of the building, some moving, some not. Police SUVs were doubling as ambulances for a while, and soon just a row of ambulances had pulled up waiting to take the dead injured away. I stayed on campus after this happened. I didn't attend classes as we did not have to, and used the next month of time as a way to get closer with the people who were on campus, and help my friends heal. Lots of therapy got me through that one. It's still hard for me to not enter a classroom and immediately look at the windows to see if I can jump out, the door to see if it locks, or if there are alternative exits that you can use. The worst part about this was the political movement that came afterwards. Reporters stopping me for any kind of statement and then twisting it as much as possible to fit their agenda. Religious zealots handing out pamphlets and yelling in megaphones saying we deserved the terror that occurred to us, and that it was our fault. Every year on the anniversary, they would come back to campus. In the end, I now am a PhD student. I've used this experience to motivate me to achieve the most I can, and to help others unlock their potential. I've got a couple, some direct, some not. On the 19th of April, 1995, I was 4 years old and at a preschool around 6 miles west of the Murrah building. I distinctly remember hearing what sounded like distant thunder. Then the ground shook. All of us ran to the window and could see smoke from that direction. I remember a teacher coming into the room and telling the other adults that the Murrah building had been bombed. I remember nothing else of it though. My parents did a good job of keeping me sheltered from it. The 3rd of May 1999, a huge effing tornado hit and killed a lot of people. I was in an AIDS shelter. I remember the newscaster telling people they should tell their families goodbye, just in case. The 20th of May 2013, a friend of mine was living in Moore. Okay. Shortly after the EF5 tornado passed, he went to help dig through rubble. He ended up at a 7/11 where every person who was inside died. He saw some horrific stuff. Things I don't think I should repeat. The 31st of May 2013, an EF5 tornado formed west of the OKC metro area. It was headed directly for my part of town. My parents, my daughter and I took all of the dogs to our neighbor's shelter, prepared for the absolute worst case scenario. Just as it was getting within a couple of miles, it turned south. It missed my husband's workplace by a block, and he was there at the time. His friend was also killed when he took shelter in a drainage ditch. There was a flash flood and he and a bunch of his family drowned. TLDR. Oklahoma is scary. For a place that comes off so unremarkable, it seems to be trying very hard to kill the people willing to live there. Well, here is my experience. I was in India with my family while father on a business trip when I was a kid. We stayed in an amazing hotel, all paid for by my father's company. This was a 5-star hotel and better than any hotel room I have ever seen or stayed in. A new mall opened up by the hotel and I really wanted new shoes, so my mother took my brother and I there. When arriving there, I found out I had left my pair of socks back at the room, so we were forced to go back and get it. On the way back, we saw many police cars rushing in the direction we came from. Disregarding it, we went to the lobby and the police grabbed us and locked us in. It turned out that a bomb had gone off at the mall. The next day we discovered that the location was a bus stop directly in front of the shoe store. Going back and getting socks saved my life. Christchurch earthquake in February 2011. I went to school in town at that time and that day we finished early, at 12 p.m. I decided I felt like hanging out in town after school that day, but no one else wanted to, so instead I went home. Luckily I did, because people were crushed to death by some of the brick buildings falling down. I was safely sitting in my bedroom on my bed when the big one came, watching the telephone, Lady Gaga music video on my iPod. At this point I was used to constant aftershocks, so it didn't really alarm me when it started. But when it didn't stop after 30 seconds, I did sort of wonder what the frick I should do. I got up off my bed halfway through and went and stood under a doorway. Afterwards I had a walk around my house, with shoes on because there was broken glass from all mum's ornaments all over the carpet. The house was structurally sound, but I still didn't feel comfortable inside, so I sat outside with my laptop till that went flat. We'd obviously lost power. But yeah, I survived because my friends didn't want to hang out with me. No one I knew died. 200 and something odd people died that day. Most were from 2 buildings that totally collapsed. I was meant to be meeting a friend at the cathedral that day to go shopping in the city. She called me 20 before the earthquake, right when I would need to leave to meet her, and said she was running late and wouldn't be there for another hour. I would have been in the cathedral if she wasn't running late. Her running late saved my life. On the 11th of September, 2001, I was in my office at the Pentagon when a plane crashed into the building. I was in the E-ring, just round the corner from where the plane hit. It was a pretty orderly evacuation. They sent everyone out onto the parade grounds outside the building, which was on the opposite side of the impact. I survived because of the fact that the location of impact, while only about 200 yards from my office, happened in the empty wedge of the building that had recently wrapped up renovations that included new blast doors, walls, all new windows, and reinforced framing throughout that section. Our office was scheduled to move into the new section in the following month. BTW, it was a plane. Any missile big enough to leave a hole the size of the one the plane left would have obliterated a much larger section of that building. As a side note, if that guy had nosed down into the central courtyard, we might not be having this conversation. This is a story from my parents. My mother and father were living in Cambodia at the time where the Khmer Rouge took place. Pretty much like a Holocaust of Cambodia. My mother never really spoke of things that happened when I learned more about it growing up. One day I'm giving her a nice massage for her tired legs and I have always noticed a couple white patch marks on her legs. I questioned her what it was and she hesitated first but then replied, "Those are marks left from bullets." She had fled on countless occasions with my father from Pol Pot's regime. but luckily there was a refugee camp supplied by Americans that assisted in the situation when she got shot. 2 on the left, 1 on the right leg. Seeing dead bodies was a natural thing as they were attempting their escape. She had seen someone step on a landmine and blew to bits right in front of her before. Permanently scarred, she never tried speaking of these horrible stories. The American assisted in bringing my parents to Thailand where it was safer. My 3 oldest siblings were born there and eventually they left for the United States around 1988 if I am not mistaken. Also, side note, my father had 3 wives at the time. One hung herself cause she felt there was no hope. The other had her throat slit. My mother, I suppose, was very well composed with the situation. Otherwise, this concludes the story. There are more details I could share, but it's not really something I like mentioning much. The Unthinkable, Who Survives When Disaster Strikes by Amanda Ripley made me understand why people don't behave rationally in emergency situations, and why you should pay attention to the airline emergency presentation every time. I deployed to Afghanistan in 2012. I was to be there for 9 months. Of course I did not want to go, but I joined the US Army 2 years prior and had to do what my country asked of me. On deployment I was a driver for our MRAP Max Pro Dash vehicle. Amazing vehicle, and state of the art when it came to IED blasts. V-shaped hull, ISS upgraded suspension, and all the bells and whistles. I was in a team, like most standard army men. In my truck I had myself, my gunner, my team leader, truck commander, and an extra passenger in the back for dismounting. Around the end of May of the deployment, I was told I would be taken out of my team and put into the TOC, operations building, to help out for a few months because I don't know, I was just picked. So I obliged and did my new duty. Then the 8th of July came around. I was told I was being put back into my team and I would continue my driving role. Yes, I missed my team and I hated being left behind when missions came up. Our mission on the 8th of July was to move out in a 4-truck convoy and deliver personnel to one of our larger bases about 30 minutes drive away so they may go home early. We packed all 4 Max Pros full, 7 people a truck, and then we got the trucks staged and ready to roll out of the front gate. I was turning on my truck when someone from the TOC came down and told me I was being pulled from this mission because the man in charge of the TOC needed my help with something. I didn't argue, thinking it was no big deal. It was a simple turn and burn to drop personnel off anyway, no biggie. So I wander back to the TOC. When I get inside, I find out my name was pulled from driving and added with another soldier from a different platoon in my place to drive my truck. I found out the reason I couldn't roll out was because I didn't finish my training duties to the person who would be replacing me. And since today's mission was a simple one, the man in charge said I should stay and finish training. I again did not argue. I watched from our raid camera as my squad of 4 trucks left our front gate. I watched them with the camera for 10 minutes in crystal clear HD vision as the IED went off on the convoy. The IED hit the last vehicle of the convoy. My vehicle. My team's vehicle. My vehicle just got hit from an IED. I ran out and got the man in charge and all the other operation personnel. 6 died that day, to include the driver. 6 out of 7 in my truck died that day. 2 years ago. I still struggle sometimes with survivor's guilt. Like, why me? Why didn't I drive that day? Why was I saved? Who knows? Any questions you all may have, just ask away and I will do my best to answer. I just can't imagine. Sorry for your loss. My good friend went through the same situation there and the guilt consumed him unfortunately. My family and I were supposed to be in Malaysia for Christmas in 2004, when the tsunami struck. We were staying with friends in Australia a week before and they offered to let us spend Christmas with their family. We changed flights a couple of days before Christmas and stayed there until a few days after. I was surreal seeing it on the news. We weren't sure what to do for a while before the travel agency called and told us that we could still go as the specific area we stayed in was not too badly hit. I was kind of amazed at how fast they'd cleaned up. When we got there it was pretty clean around the hotel but all of the furniture was crappy plastic lawn furniture as the rest had washed away. They'd managed to clean the pool but they showed pictures of how it had been a few days before, with a taxi and a shark in the pool. There was a line a couple of meters up the wall throughout the whole town. Every house below it was brown, everything above perfectly white. That specific area was quite lucky as there was only a narrow strip of land down by the beach before the hills started, so people didn't have to run far. And it was further away from the epicenter, so a few people got calls from people that had been struck and they managed to evacuate almost everyone. Very strange to spend the day lounging by the pool and on the beach, and then see news reports on TVs by the bar and in our room showing off the horror that was very close and could have been us. In September 2011 there was an earthquake in Christchurch Nz. I was walking in the middle of a busy road when the quake hit. Every freaking window shattered. Cars were swerving. People were holding the ground. When crap stopped rocking in the distance, 2 buildings had collapsed and there was huge clouds of billowing dust down the other end of the street. I was standing in front of a 15-story building, the bottom floor my mum worked in. While everyone ran out, I ran inside to make sure she was okay. She was trapped between 2 fridges and a counter. No one stayed to help. 1 meter further into the road and I could have been potentially decapitated. Sheer luck I wasn't. You meant February, the September one was 2010 and nobody died. My old boss, we'll call him Stan, was held hostage in some famous San Francisco hostage taking scenario. The husband of one of his co-workers thought she was cheating him with her boss, so he came in and shot the place up, killing everyone except Stan and one other person because the gunman only had 1 bullet left. So he took them as hostages and had a standoff for 4 days or so. Ended up killing himself with the last bullet. Somewhat funny part of the story. Stan is super gay and during one of the phone calls with police he screamed in the background with a high-pitched feminine voice. So for 4 days the news was saying the gunman had taken 2 women hostage. Apparently it took some figuring out once the whole thing was over. But yeah, Stan survived by being so gay the gunman knew he wasn't boning his wife. My stepmom missed her flight from NYC to Paris because she lost track of time. She was running pretty late but didn't realize the flight was delayed. This was 1996, so she didn't have quick access to this info like we do today. She didn't feel like rushing, so she decided to miss her flight and rebook. Really good call because it was TWA flight 800. I was on a beach in Thailand with my whole family when the tsunami hit in 2004. Although we got off it somewhat okay, it wasn't the best of days for any of us. I remember pretty much everything, apart from a minute or so when I was knocked out. From when the ocean started to disappear to when we were up in the mountains behind all the hotels and the main road waiting for news on what the frick just happened and if it was safe to go down from the mountain. There is one thing that continuously bothers me when I think back on my actions that day. When the water started to come back towards the beach and we could see the first big wave starting to break, perhaps a kilometer from where the ocean usually meets the beach, I actually said out loud something along the lines, "This is a tsunami." I've seen it on the Discovery Channel. But I didn't really connect the dots and figure out that it was probably a good idea to leave the fricking beach and warn as many people as I could. The wave coming towards us didn't look nearly as big as in the documentary on TV. So how bad could it really be? You have probably seen the pictures and clips on YouTube. The actual wave height wasn't that big and it didn't look very threatening until it got closer, and then it was pretty much too late to get away. And let me tell you, when that water hits you, you are almost completely powerless to do anything. The force of the water is hard to explain to anyone that hasn't experienced something similar. As far as I know, no one at our hotel got killed in that tsunami, so it's not like I failed to prevent a death. But I wonder how much pain and suffering I could have prevented if I only would have realized the trouble we were in before it was too late. I lived in Mobile, Alabama during Katrina. You really didn't hear much about Katrina other than New Orleans, but it was bad everywhere. Only a few people died in Mobile, but there was a lot of damage. It looked like a bomb went off. We were without power for a long time, but that was the only direct effects that I experienced. Overall, the whole thing was very scary. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.